Well, it's good to see you, brother.
Thank you. Good to see
This
you
is
as well.
our, thank you. This is our third session for
Mm,
our Black Studies Task Force interviews. So
great.
today we have one of our church's power couples here with the two Dr. Dixons. And we have Dr. Kevin Dixon today. And we'll spend some time talking to him about some of his accomplishments that he has had over the years. And we'll just go on and get started. And Dr. Kevin Dixon, tell us a little bit about how you ended up at Faith Ministries and how long you and your wife have been there.
Probably since around 2019, 2018, 2019, we were members of St. Paul AME Church, and they had gone through some transitions. And at that point, we just were exploring and visiting a lot of faith based organizations. Especially in my role at Adam H, I was doing a lot of outreach with different faith leaders and having self care sessions with senior pastors here in Central Ohio. And we sat in a couple of sessions and came back, saw a lot of friends and a lot of folks who also, left St. Paul at that time, joined as well. And we knew a lot of good friendly faces over there. And we said, well, hey, it seems like a warm and friendly church, and lively and good music, and great sermons, of course, and
Mhm.
just friendly people for such a large faith institution.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, good. Well, it's good to have you and your wife with us and part of the faith family. So
Yeah.
we'll just jump in here and wanted to ask you, first of all, where did you grow up?
Well, my father was in the military. He was in the Marine Corps. So we spent a lot of time traveling during my school years. Was born in Virginia, spent time in Philadelphia, ended up in North Carolina. Then we moved to Hawaii for 3 years, and then back to
Nice.
Pennsylvania, a small town outside of Philadelphia called Penn. And then prior to coming to Columbus, I moved to Philadelphia, and was horribly bored when I got here to Columbus at that time. I got here in 1987. My wife came a little bit earlier to take a position at Ohio State University as a faculty member.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah. So your wife was at the Ohio State University, and this
Yes.
is our third interview. And each person that we've talked to, you may have noticed, have had some sort of interaction with the Ohio State University, where I graduated from. So
Oh, okay.
we cheer on the Buckeyes here. So.
That's it. In fact, Melanie was on the athletic council at Ohio State when she was over dance education area at Ohio State, and so we were able to see all the Buckeye games and had 50-yard line seats, 3 rows from the
Nice.
field. We hung out pretty nicely for about 18 years, but 4 years on the
Oh,
advisory council, the athletic
okay.
advisory council.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, we'll be interviewing your wife, I believe, soon as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Of course, she is one of our co-leaders for our Black Studies Task Force here. So we're happy to have her and have her expertise bringing along with her. Where did you attend school then? Because you've moved around quite a bit.
Quite a bit, yeah. High school was Wissahickon High School. It's Montgomery County, just outside of the Philadelphia area. A large Italian community area, and we lived in a small Black community called Penn. And so I was at Wissahickon High School, and then went to college at Millersville University, which is in the heart of Amish country. So
Mm,
every fall and spring, you had the manure smells throughout the campus because there's no air conditioning at that time. So went to Millersville University, and then when we moved here, went to Central Michigan University for a master's in administration, and then received my doctorate from Union Institute University down in
mm,
Cincinnati. So
okay. Ah, great, great. Yeah. And now, through those travels and experiences and your education, and looking at where you are now, as you
Mhm.
look back, what or who would you say had some of the greatest impacts on your life and
Wow.
where you've come from?
Well, I kind of looked at phases of my life. Growing up, obviously, it was my parents. They made sure we never had to think about food or a safe place to live. They always provided for us. And then, obviously, extended family, relatives lived in the general area of that. But when I went to school, I actually, didn't know what I wanted to do my first year. And then probably about my second year, um, fell in love with, heading down to the college radio station. And one of the advisors for the college radio station was a good mentor. His show was called the Doc Rock Show. Mine was the Kevin Disco Dixon Show. So he became a mentor while I was in college, and then the vice president of student services. He and I became very good, close friends, and as I went through there. But when I got out, and that's we'll talk about that. But when I got more involved with Philadelphia radio, my mentor was Maddie Humphrey. Maddie was just a brilliant individual, but that's in each phase of my life, picked up different mentors. So I had about 5 or 6 different mentors who had a lot of influence on my early career and mid career development. So
Great. Yeah, I know that that makes a difference when you have those mentors in your life. They can kind
yeah.
of help you down the path toward your goals.
And it's almost as though God put these folks in my life for various reasons. So Maddie came into my
Hmm.
life. Another friend of mine, Jim McGowan, who was paralyzed from mid chest down, was another mentor. And we'll talk some more about that shortly. And then Dr. Edwin Nichols, when I was doing my research for my dissertation, I would travel to D.C., spend time with him. He was one of the founders of the Association of Black Psychologists, and so each aspect of my life, I had different folks that just kind of took me under their wings and gave me some guidance, and I sat and learned and listened.
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Those individuals are very important to our lives. As I
Yeah.
often say, you have one hand up, connected to someone who's been there, done that, and you got another hand
Yes.
behind you to help pull somebody else up.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the way we should all take ownership of, is reaching back and bringing someone along.
Mm,
So I have a cadre of young mentees, probably not as young anymore, but 40s and 50s, that kind of, been
mm.
reaching out to me, writing letters of recommendation, doing all kinds of things. But it's been a joy.
Yes, amen. Now, tell us more about how you got involved in radio broadcasting and some of your greatest memories and interviews.
Cool. Yeah, well, I when I got to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So, I, was taking some classes, and then I went down to the college radio station just out of curiosity because I always liked music. And so I ended up going down to the college radio station. I said, "Oh, wow, this is pretty cool." And someone said, "Hey, you can, join, and you just have to do news for the first semester, and then you can, petition to get your own show." And, so I did do that, and I said, "Wow, this is a lot of fun," and had lots of great experiences being a college DJ. I earned helped me pay my school education. I set up a business called Groove Line Disco Productions back in the Philadelphia area, and then, the Black Student Union started asking me, well, could you MC for this event? So I was able to MC for Gil Scott Heron, the Persuasions,
Mm,
did the introduction for Jimmy J.J. Walker, stage crew for the Crusaders, Met Roy Ayers, Gene Carn, Dexter Waddell, Brass Construction. So I was in my element. And then it was
yes.
interesting. In 1978, a friend of mine who was a high school buddy, he was, I think, just graduated, was a senior, said, "Hey, I'm doing some volunteer work at a Philadelphia station. Would you like to come down?" I said, "Well, what station is it?" He said, "WDAS." And I said,
Mm,
"Wow, that's the station where my goal would be to get to." So he took me down there one Sunday and he introduced me to Maddie Humphrey, who was his mentor. And she had me sit in the back of the studio. And at that time, was in the studio with Sonia Sanchez, State Representative David P. Richardson. He was president of the National Black Legislators Association, and Senator Roxanne Jones. And I'm sitting there listening. And I said, "Wow, this is pretty good stuff they're talking about." And then I start to realize how superficial DJing was, and compared to what these folks were doing on air. And I wasn't aware of the enormous history of WDAS at the time. But Maddie said, if you want to volunteer, just write me a letter. Tell me what you're interested in doing and how you can help. I did the letter. I sent it to her. She invited me down. She said, bring a composition book with you because you're going to take notes. And Maddie was just brilliant. She was, she really was just a master teacher, master scholar. So I went down, and the history of WDAS radio back in the 60s was the first station to allow Martin Luther King and Malcolm X
Mm.
to come on regularly to talk about the civil
Wow.
rights movement. Daisy Bates, Ralph Abernathy, Roy Wilkerson, Jesse Jackson, Ed Bradley
Mm.
started at WDAS in Philadelphia. That's how he got
Mm.
his broadcast break. Then music, Marvin Gaye, Temptation, Smokey, every week somebody was coming in from out of town, and it was just an enlightening experience. So I that really inspired me to do exceptionally well in college and focus on the academics, and go down on weekends to do this show and come back for my Sunday evening show on college radio. So that's what really got me involved. And Maddie, one of the things she told me, she said, "Kevin, this is a commercial station, but we're community service. We're here to serve. We're here to do things for the community. We're here to allow people on our probably 15 hours of AM and FM broadcasting to inform the community about what's going on, the benefits and the things." But she said the commercial side is very superficial, so I want to keep you
Right.
away. And the commercial side was what I was really interested in.
Right.
But uh, she taught me the importance of community service, and I spent 8 years with Maddie Humphrey, but I had some of the most amazing experiences working in
Mm.
broadcasting. My first couple of years, we did something called Unity Day, where the station would host a community festival on the Parkway where the art museum is located, where they now have the Joe Frazier, statue. And walking out there in front of 1 million people on stage was just like, this is unbelievable. And they would bring Earth, Wind, and Fire, Stevie Wonder,
Wow.
major stuff. And it was really about getting the community educated, having resources there, health tests, school access information, all those things that were there. And each year they would do this, and they would get about 1 million people out there every year.
Mm. Mm.
Um, but I would slip away periodically and let me go to Teddy Pendergrass's birthday party, and the after party.
Ah, yeah, yeah,
You
sure.
had to do that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
you got to take advantage of those opportunities.
you do. I met with Mother Divine, the wife of Father
Mm.
Divine, went out to their multi-million-dollar mansion, and we were the only ones invited out. And we had to
Mm.
meet, we had to go through a greeting line, and then we resided back into her garden room for tea and fresh baked cookies. And it was like, I'm, 20, 21 years old. It's like, wow,
Mm.
this is amazing. Going to all the major performances in Philadelphia, Atlanta Black Arts Festival, had a press badge. I was able to get Philadelphia press badge. So it gave me access to free parking anywhere I wanted in the city, whether it's illegal or
Mhm.
not, and then access to a lot of events. So this was Melanie introduced me to the Black Arts Festival, my wife. And we got down there and ran into Jeffrey Holder. Maynard Jackson was there. She introduced him and Kat because she went to Spelman. Catherine and Dunham.
Okay.
So I was trying to take a picture of Cicely Tyson. She kept on turning her head, and I was going back and forth. And finally, I waited until she turned back around and snapped a picture. And she looked at me. She said, "You happy you got your picture now?" And I'm sitting there, "Well, this is a press. This is a press reception for."
Right, right,
I said,
right.
"That's Cicely Tyson." So
Yeah.
it was amazing, going to the Sixers when they won the national or won the championship. with Maurice Cheeks, Julius Irving. They had a big reception at the reptile house at the Philadelphia Zoo. And you're sitting up there, and I'm sitting there. This is absolutely just amazing. So, had a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun, and but it was a lot of work because I this was only on
Mhm.
Sunday. I would get there at 6 o'clock Sunday morning and wouldn't leave to 9 o'clock Sunday night. And my day
Uh,
job before I went to Temple University was junior achievement. So I was in executive offices, Monday through Friday of, Arthur Young, Arthur Anderson, Mark Sharp Dome. And, you see these offices that look like mini mansions. And so I did that work. But then when I left and went to Temple, I worked with Dr. Malefi Asante, who was the chair of the African American Studies Department at Temple. So it really fit more in line with the work I was doing at WDAS, and I was able to get a lot of the scholars on to interview, and she would take me up to the prisons every week to visit inmates and talk about their families on radio. They locked me in one time because I was interviewing someone. They gave me a tape, and because I ran out of tape, I was interviewing the lifers, the Vietnam Veterans for Better Legislation, the gospel group up there, Nation of Islam, had all this wonderful information. And I ran out of tape. So there was one of the inmates who gave me an extra tape. And I was leaving, and they said, contraband. And I'm saying, contraband? They
well,
just gave me extra tape. So they had to call the warden, and I had to go through about 2 hours of sitting and waiting for them to, come and eventually take my tapes. And the next day they said, come, you'll be able to get your tapes the next day from this. And this is maximum security prison.
mhm,
And
right.
then all of a sudden the tapes mysteriously disappeared. We don't know what happened to those
Uh,
tapes. Yeah.
wow,
So it
wow.
was, but I
That
enjoyed it.
hurts.
Yeah, it hurts. It
Yeah.
did. Yeah, I had great stuff. And it wasn't anything bad about the conditions of the maximum security prison, but it just talked about their lives and their experiences. But when you're working with folks that don't understand and appreciate, the value of having community and connections outside of the institution, it was valuable.
Sure, sure, no doubt. Yeah, and those are great experiences. I was in written journalism myself for
Oh,
Calling Post and some of the other black
oh, wow.
publications. So just meeting some of these historical figures and man, just
Uh-huh.
having a front row seat on a lot of those experiences and things,
Yeah.
just amazing.
Yeah.
So
Did you
yeah,
work with
man.
Amos Lynch?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
wow.
Amos, his brother was my dad's best friend, Dave Lynch.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah,
That
they
was the
go
one
back
when
a
I
child.
first got to Columbus and worked at Adam H. At that time, it was the Mental Health Board. Marty Miller said, "You've got to meet the pillars of the community." So she took me around to meet Amos Lynch, took me around to meet Reverend Troy and a few others. Said, "You
Hmm.
have to know who these
Hmm.
folks are." And I said,
Oh yeah,
"Okay,
oh yeah,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, the bedrock of Columbus. Yeah. Now, in your experiences, I know that you had covered Jim McGowan's swim of the English Channel. Can
yeah."
you talk a little bit more about that for those that don't know who that is?
Jim McGowan used to sing with a group called the Four Fellows in New York. It was a doo-wop group that they first recorded Soldier Boy before Elvis Presley,
Mm,
got it and made all this money. And they were just a Bed-Stuy group that was really popular. They were doing a lot of touring. And Jim was also a director of a youth camp. And one night he was guarding, some young ladies who were getting bothered by a gang, and as he was trying to prevent them from messing with the girls, someone stabbed him in the abdomen with a sword. And Jim went to the ED, and they repaired the stab wound, but at the same time, they damaged his spine, gave him a spinal anesthetic,
mm,
and he was paralyzed from mid chest down. But he didn't let that stop him. He was this, a Renaissance person, and he was being scouted at the time by the Brooklyn Dodgers. But he continued on with his singing. That life with the professional baseball was shattered. But I met him when we were doing a radio program, and we heard about this guy named Jim McGowan was going to do a skydive with another
mm,
paraplegic, and Jim was paralyzed from mid chest down, which was a high place to be paralyzed. He was working at Temple University, and so I went to meet with him, talk to him a little bit. We brought him on the program. He told us about the skydive. He was going to hook up with this gentleman named, I think, Jim Toman, who had done over 20,000 skydives until he was paralyzed diving
Wow.
from a diving accident. So they both were going to link up, and I think they were going after a Star Crest Award, and they had to jump into the Pocono Mountains into the lakes because if they hit the ground, would crush their bones.
Mhm.
So Maddie and I, she drove and I drove separately. And what happened, it was delayed. So I had to come back to the studio to do the show the next morning, 6 a.m. Sunday morning. She stayed overnight and was able to, cover that event along with a lot of other media. So Jim, we brought him into the studio after, the next day after he had the successful skydive, brought him into the studio and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, how would you like to be a part of my Project Aquarius team?" And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, one of the reporters at the Poconos said, 'Hey, what do you plan to do next, Jim?' He said, 'I would like to swim the English Channel.'" And all of a sudden, I'm on his team as a team historian, and also I was doing coverage for the WDAS radio. So for a year, we prepared. He was practicing in cold waters, New England. He couldn't even swim. And he worked with a couple of swim coaches from Temple who had him trying to swim on his stomach, but his legs would just drag and he was unable to do it. So they found this gentleman who worked with people who were quadriplegics. He used to teach them how to bowl. And he told Jim, "Flip on your back." And the rest was history. Jim was swimming miles upon miles in the
Wow.
water. So once a month, I would interview him on the AM side of the station. He would tell me his progress. I would cover some of the events, where he was doing. And then, or I was rowing in a boat with him, in the Poconos when they, was it the basketball person who just died? What was his name? He had a brother, Gumbel, Greg Gumbel. Greg Gumbel was covering it for, I think it wasn't BET. It was one of the African American stations he was on at the time. So we spent a year practicing. He had a whole team of folks working with him on the physical aspect of it, and he and I would talk about his research, which was the Underground Railroad. He's written
Mhm.
like 3 books on the Underground Railroad. He focused on Harriet Tubman. He focused on uh, uh, William Still and Thomas Garrett, who was a Quaker. And so he was looking at slave narratives. He was just a brilliant author. So he's published a lot. But we ended up in 1986 in the fall, planning to swim. We all flew over to Delaware. The team and and I were the only persons of color, of African American descent. So they all communicated and said the bus that was going to take them to New York to catch the flight out. Well, everybody got the call except for me.
Oh, wow.
Everybody, yep. And I wasn't surprised. So next thing I know, I called my uncle, who was a Philadelphia police officer. Said, "Well, looks like I'm not going to make it." He says, "Well, where do you have to go?" And I said, "We got to go to Heathrow, but I have to leave out of New York. How am I going to do that? I can't do it." He said, "Why don't you catch a plane from Philadelphia?" And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, it costs you about $100. It's a prop plane, and it'll get you to New York." Got on a plane. This is God. Got on the plane, took the prop plane. He drove me. It was an hour and a half to the airport from where I was staying. Drove to my uncle's. He took me down there. Got off the plane at JFK. The door I got off, the team was actually getting on the next plane to go over to Heathrow. Literally, as soon as I walked off, I saw them all going on, and I was just in shock because I thought I would have to travel to another gate. And I said, "But God," you know.
Wow.
So
Wow. Really?
we went over with a team. We ABC, NBC, CBS all followed us over. Not a lot of newspapers. Russian TASS news agency, China was covering it. We had tons of
Mhm.
things going on in terms of coverage, and one of the reporters saw how I was being excluded from some of the stuff. So he looked at me. He said, "I'm going to make you a star tonight." And when the Philadelphia Action News, and they did the big scene, I opened up on the screen, and the fix and the Delaware Valley just was me, and I said, "Wow!" And everybody's calling me, saying, "Hey, I heard you. You were on TV and all this." So that ended all that craziness. He
Yeah.
attempted the swim was postponed a couple of days because of the weather. He got in the water. He got out about 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours in the water, and what happened was he started to take on water, start swallowing water, and
Mhm.
got
Mhm.
into a situation where he just was totally disoriented, and we were just shocked because he had been going. 7, 10, 15 hours in the water already. This was 3 hours into it. We were all in shock. And I told
Mm,
his coach, I said, Lou, you got to get him out of there. He's taking on water. And we had to drag him out. Well, we found out the next day that he didn't put his catheter in properly because he wanted to do live
wow.
interviews on the beach live for Philadelphia News, and he didn't put it in. So the urine backed up in his system, and he basically
Mm,
passed out. He took on water,
oh,
and
wow.
foam was coming out of his mouth. It was a bad
Mm,
situation, but um, he felt so bad. He just started. He started to cry when they interviewed him at the hospital. He said, I wanted to, show everybody, especially people with disabilities, that you can do
mhm,
anything. You can continue your activities. And the city embraced it so much. Well, it made news everywhere. And everywhere we went, we were stopped. And people were just saying, you are so brave to do what you did, and we love you. The city had a parade for us. All three networks carried it live. It was a monumental event. And then later that week, I had a big celebration because I had to come to Columbus because Melanie was already here. So all of that I left in Philadelphia and leaving the radio station. It was heartbreaking. And coming to
wow.
Columbus in 1987, it was Ohio State football, some farm fields, and fast food restaurants.
Mhm, mhm.
But Jim, for years,
Yeah.
he worked with me, helped me with my doctoral work. He was doing a lot of work with Harvard University and lecturing all over the country. I didn't even realize he passed away, from sepsis, from when
Mm,
he went to the hospital. So, and then my other mentor, Maddie, passed away without me knowing. No one called me, no one really, reached out to me. Everybody assumed I knew, so I lost two
mm.
big powerhouses in my life.
Yeah, wow, wow. Yeah, well, amazing brother there, because
Yeah,
even though he didn't complete the swim,
right.
being able to do all that he did, I think accomplished the objective of what he was going for.
You hit it spot on. They actually, the city saw this as a triumph, and it inspired millions of people around the globe. We got calls from all over the
Mhm.
world,
Sure.
but especially, and I was able to do live reports to the radio station, every day, every couple of minutes. I would, send another little segment, to the radio station to cover it there. But it got a lot of attention, and people were just inspired by his story. Being
Mhm.
paralyzed from mid chest down and making this attempt. They said for him that was all they needed to see. For
Yeah,
him to try.
right, right. Sure,
Yeah.
sure, sure. Yeah, incredible guy. Yeah. Well, I know that you have had a plethora of experiences in life and
Mhm.
several different types of accomplishments. I know that you were with the Atom Board for a
Yeah.
while there. So, could you tell us a little bit more about that and some of your accomplishments with them?
Sure. I was with Adam H for 34 years. The great thing is I started off as a public information officer and then became executive assistant to the president, who was Phil Cass at the time. And then soon after, we did a lot of work together, and he was only there about 10 years, just under 10 years. But and he became the president of Columbus Medical Association and Foundation. But at Adam H, I started off in public affairs doing basic coverage of events, but we were having a lot of community events. We bring in Sally Jessy Raphael and some other and Betty Friedan and folks like that. But when we got a grant from the Ohio Department of Mental Health to do something called the Innovations Grant, I was able to say, hey, we found out in a couple of studies that African Americans in mental health were misdiagnosed, over medicated, over hospitalized,
Mhm.
underutilized
Mhm.
community based care, given greater severity of diagnosis, all these disparities we started to find out. So I started working with the Association of Black Psychologists. We'd bring them down, we would have these conversations. Then I became a member of their board, and then the Association of Black Journalists. So we would have Angela Pace, Jerry Revish, and all these folks from all the stations meeting on Saturdays at Adam H. All of them collaborating very well. Their stations didn't know we were having these sessions, but all of them were just, wonderful folks to be around, whether it was radio, whether it was TV. And it started giving me ideas of what we could start to do to address this. So at Adam H, in 1990, that's about 4 years after getting there, and as executive assistant president, um, I worked with Dr. Mariba Kelsey, and Dr. Linda James Myers, and we came together with Phil Cass, Dr. Cass, and we said, "Hey, why don't we apply for this grant?" So I went away one weekend, while the house was being painted, and I started sketching out what we could do. And I said, "Why just continue on with the State Department bringing in 300 people for a conference and just one or two good speakers? Why don't we bring everybody here?" So I created something called the Afrocentric Training Project, bringing the
Mm,
best minds across the United States and globally into Columbus. And that started in 1992 with a series of quarterly conferences, and then it extended to three national conferences, and as well as the quarterly conferences, and then one major event around ethnic images and stereotypes in the media. So we brought everybody we could think of, and I had a whole team of folks here, whether it was Amos Lynch, whether it was Cheryl Boyce, Ohio Commissioner of Minority Health, whether it was Angela Dawson, who was at Project Linden at the time, Nancy Jones. We had everybody you can imagine locally here helping us pull this together. Senator Ray Miller, Charlene DeBarris, we
mm,
worked with just about everybody. And the first conference happened in 1993. And from 300 that the State Department was getting, we ended up with over 1,200 people at our first conference.
mm,
And that was the year we had Maya Angelou, but we already brought in Nikki Giovanni. We had Haki Madhubuti, we had Sonia Sanchez, we had Kwanzaa founder Milana Karinga, we had Archbishop George Stallings of the Imani Temple founder. We had, people like Robert Hooks, actor and director, Barbara O, Ian Van Sant, Dick Gregory. I mean, Alvin Poussaint from Harvard, who worked with the Cosby Show at the time, and I forget their follow up to the Cosby. Barbara Reynolds, who was from Columbus. We had so many people. The first, second conference, and then we had the third conference. I invited a lot more folks in, and I said, "You're here for this day." You fly out the next day. No one would leave. They said, "We've never seen this many folks of this caliber at the same place."
yeah,
And we
sure.
didn't have any hotel rooms left because they were supposed to move out and fly back. And I was, move
Mm,
new people to. We had to cut deals and move people to different hotels, and the hotel was already booked with our conference stuff. So it was absolutely amazing. So we had several different panels on education, on youth, on arts and entertainment. We had healthcare, behavioral healthcare, everybody you can imagine we had here. Robert Williams, who he created the BITCH test, the Black Intelligence Test for Cultural Homogeneity. He testified before Congress because he was the father of Ebonics. And he said Ebonics is
mm,
not teaching Black kids bad English. Ebonics is really bringing us up to a standard English and helping them understand. But he also said that many times, there's a lot of bias in misunderstanding about how we communicate. So he did
mhm,
this something called the bitch test, which is a 100-item test, and would ask things like, "Where's the ball behind the sofa?" And the kids would always get it wrong. And he said, when he did the IQ test, he said, "Change it to couch," and all the kids got it right because the kids were
mm,
saying,
mm,
things like that. So Malefia Asante, the father, our chief architect of Afrocentric thought, Wade Nobles, who's done a lot of things. We also had Naeem Akbar, and we talked about issues, everything from anything you can imagine around Black psychology, around healthcare, around education. We had Asa Hilliard in. We had what's her name? Her father was a pastor here in town. Um, oh gosh, big name there. It'll come to me. But anybody we can bring in, Yana Van Sant to say, "Kevin, if I could just come and sell my book, Acts of Faith." And I said, "Sure, come
mm,
on in." And she and Barbara O from Daughters of the Dust, they did a women's healing workshop at this conference.
mm,
We had this brother named Maurice Latham who made everything vegetarian food absolutely fascinating. So
mm,
it was magical for 4 years. Still get calls today. Hawaii called me and said, "We want you to come over here and help the University of Hawaii set up the thing for the Hawaiians." So King Kamehameha, Iliukulani, they wanted to look at their African Hawaiian heritage.
Mhm.
And
Right.
a lot of folks were, coming in from all over the Caribbean, Canada, and all that. We had a
Wow.
marketplace. We
Wow.
transformed. In fact, WOSU TV built a studio in the convention center and filmed all the folks that we brought in. Tony Brown
Mm,
did his whole feature. He did 2 shows on the conference. Tony Brown's Journal. WVKO Radio built the station inside the studio so they could interview the guests that we had. Channel 6, Charlene Brown did Wednesday's Child there at the African marketplace that we had. So
mhm,
it was
mhm,
magical. I didn't get to enjoy any of it because I was handling all the business end of it and dealing with the problems and the challenges of running the
mhm,
conference. So,
mhm. Yeah.
so that was just
Yeah.
one thing. And then, I created a number of programs while I was at Adam H. So faith-based initiatives, prevention programs under me, legal aid services, all the school based. I went around, met with every superintendent. Couldn't get a call back at first. And then it made send a
Mm,
letter. Couldn't get a rebate. And finally got services in all 16 districts. We also did the Black Film Festival where Mabel worked with Mabel Haddock. Mural project I brought back from Philadelphia from our trips to Philadelphia to learn about their behavioral health care system. I brought mental health first aid. I was the first to get trained in the state of Ohio for mental health first aid training. African American youth programs, worked with Mayor Coleman and the city officials in Parks and Rec to put counselors in recreation centers. The faith base, we work with all these senior faith leaders that came together, and we had special trainings for them on self care. Brought in national speakers for them to talk to. Duke Divinity School. They came and presented history and data on how sick pastors become the longer that they're
mm,
on sick. Pastor Wise was wise enough to be one of our guest hosts, along with Reverend Tim Aarons and Bishop Clark. And we had a really good thing. Then I started the whole immigrant and refugee services here in town.
mm,
We're just
mm,
doing a lot of work with the Somali community, taking teams out to Minneapolis to see their programs and services, including working with the Native American community. So
mm,
it's been
mm.
a blessing to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah, brother. You've named all those who's people. Yeah,
Oh,
that's amazing, man. Those are tremendous experiences, man. Few people have had the opportunity to interact with
but
these giants here.
and the thing is, I was so excited, but what I realized when I was talking to Sonia Sanchez or Dr. Karinga or Dr. Sante, FBI agents were sitting in those sessions. They would point them
Mm,
out to me. They followed them
mm,
around the country.
mhm,
Dick Gregory said
mhm,
this.
mhm,
Dick Gregory used to drive around town. We used to go shopping at a supermarket and showed me the differences between what happens in the urban supermarket and what happens in the
mhm,
suburban out in Westerville. And he
mhm.
says he never buys food in the urban community. And he showed me the
Mm,
dates. He showed me how the lights were
mm.
different, the food
Wow.
was, the pressure, everything was different.
Mhm, mhm,
Unbelievable,
mhm.
you know.
Yeah,
And he never
yeah,
he never
yeah.
ate all the 4 times I was with him all day. Never seen him eat a thing.
Mm, mm, mm.
And then
Yeah.
he, at one of our conferences, he proclaimed he was going to do a fast because of the U.S. Support of the militarization of wars.
Mm.
So he said, "I won't be eating between the summer and the first of the year."
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One of my mentors, former college professors, ran with Dick Gregory.
Oh
Yeah, and
wow.
yeah, you mentioned Dr. Linda Myers. She was one of my professors at Ohio State as well. Yes.
Yes, and she was so instrumental in helping us do all this work. And she and I are back in contact again because we were talking about, do we need to do this again? Because back then they were talking
Hmm.
about what we're going through now. They weren't shy about calling it white supremacy then. And everybody said, "Oh no, you can't say that."
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly all the things that we have now we're seeing. I had a cousin who worked
Hmm.
for this 45.5 guy, was his personal bodyguard, and the stories he told me
Mm.
are
Well,
just shocking. Yeah.
yeah, I would imagine. I would
Yeah,
imagine.
can only
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah, brother. I tell you. I know that we can talk for hours here. You just kind of barely got started with some of the things that you've done, and definitely would love to have you back at another time here because I know with all those people that you've named that there are a whole lot of stories contained within there. You just kind of water
Each
skied over
one,
top. Yes.
eh, whether it's picking up Frances Cress Welsing from the airport and saying, you know what?
Wow.
She said, sit quietly. She used to advise me, sit quietly, and the brain computer kicks on. She said, your best
Mm,
ideas will come when you're quiet and nothing's
mm,
interrupting. Barbara
mm,
Oh,
mm.
Daughters of the Dust was my spiritual mentor. So she was, just
Mhm.
amazing to do. So I've been
Yeah.
blessed. I've been really blessed,
Yeah.
and I don't take it lightly.
Yes.
My collection is going to be at the Dr. Charles Blockson collection at Temple University. My
Okay.
broadcast collection, and they also want the Afrocentric Training Project collection. I have over
Mm.
160 hours worth of footage from that time
Wow.
that
Wow.
needs to get digitized, and so it's
That's a
going to be
treasure.
interesting.
That's a
Yeah, it
treasure.
really is. And then the Schomburgs, I'm talking to them about, their collection out of the New York City library system of
Mm,
African American
mm,
research and studies. So it's been
mm.
great. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but this is great to hear about your experience with the Columbus Dispatch. I mean, Column Post, because the Column
Hmm.
Post was the first paper I was introduced to, and we did a lot of work with them, a lot of advertising. They helped us broadcast and market all the things that we were involved in at Adam H at that time.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. 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 Well, definitely some tremendous experiences there. If I had been working for the Dispatch, and I'd have people ask me sometimes about doing that. I was like, I wouldn't get the same quality of experiences that I'm getting with this newspaper. I may have made more money, but the experiences you cannot buy.
Yep.
So, yeah,
And I started off
yeah.
volunteering. And then when the National Black Network out of New York took over the station, that's when I started getting paid. So my first couple of years, I was just volunteering, spending my gas money, traveling from the college,
Mm,
which is about a 40-mile ride back and forth. And for 8 years doing a lot of that. But then I graduated in 81. From 81 to 86, I continued the broadcasting. And that was, at work full time. I had to have another job because, yeah, I was just
yeah.
on Sundays. So
Yeah. Understood. Understood.
but
Yeah.
it was,
Yeah.
meeting, Alex Coltrane, and all the jazz artists
Mm,
there in Philadelphia. And,
right.
I passed up on going to see Fela because I had to cover something else. It's like, why am I going to miss
Mm, mm,
Fela? You know,
mm, mm,
oh
mm,
gosh.
mm.
Rufus Harley, the
Yeah.
bagpipist, the jazz bagpipers. I brought him to Columbus. So I brought a lot of
Oh,
these
okay.
folks. Yeah. Yeah.
Ah, nice, nice, nice.
A lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
But Linda
Yeah.
if you learn from the best, she's brilliant.
Yes. Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Meyer.
Yes. I've had her for two or three classes actually.
Wow. Life
So
changing.
yeah.
And we used a
Yes.
lot of her
Absolutely.
theoretical model. In fact, my dissertation, which is, the experience of African Americans referencing their axiology in the workplace, phenomenological investigation, I use her model along with somebody named
Hmm.
Dr. Edwin Nichols, philosophical aspects of cultural
Yes.
difference.
Yes.
And both of those intersecting and a few others that I had in really, helped to solidify my dissertation. So she's been a
Hmm.
valuable team player.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just
No
work with her
doubt.
on the
No doubt.
Ohio Black
Great mind.
Expo. We did something called
Okay.
on the Ohio Black Expo, Message in the Music, because all that stuff I
Mm,
did with Gil Scott Heron and things like that, we had a discussion. We
yeah.
had old school and new school, and so
Mm,
Linda and a few others on our team, Suzanne Parks and Kim Braswell, we all pulled together and created this Message in the Music, and we had a panel at the Black Expo last weekend. Yeah, so
wow.
a
Wow.
lot of,
Yeah.
still trying to have some fun.
Yes, yes. Well, I tell you, there are more adventures to have,
Yeah,
and brother, you've accumulated many of them already
yeah,
in your life. So we're going to have to get together and talk some more because,
yeah.
like I said, and we have a lot of comparative notes we can share, and
Oh
there's
yeah.
definitely more to hear from you.
Journalism, yeah, what we did, if it wasn't for the journalism and the positive journalism, a lot of this wouldn't have happened. We when we did the major conferences, we would bring in a anchor from each station, including the Dispatch,
Mm,
including the, I'm not sure who from the Call and Post, but Julie Bailey and Felix Hoover and folks like that. But we did have
yeah,
this.
yeah.
We had great coverage from Call and Post, and I forget who covered those events, but I still have the articles. I'm going through it right now. I have tons of documents, a
Mm,
foot deep of articles and events,
wow.
and yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, I
we have to sit down.
understand.
We definitely have to sit down and share some notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, these interviews are good because it helps the church to know who it is that they are seeing every week and they may be sitting next to. And
yeah,
I've always said that unfortunately, a lot of times we may have associations with people, but we never know what it is that they've done in their lives
yes,
until a lot of times at the funeral and you're reading
yes.
the obituary, you know? And it's like, wow, if I had only known, I would have loved to have talked to that person more about some of these experiences that they had in their life journeys. You know,
Wow.
yeah. So this is tremendous, brother. This is tremendous. So I just want to thank you for your time and joining
Mhm.
us here today. And like I said, your wife will be on our lineup as well and look to hear from her. And like I said, it would be great to have you come back at a later time, and you and I just need to get together
Just
and kick it around
chop it
as
up.
well.
You say chop it up.
Yes,
Yeah. But
yes,
I give
sir.
deference to my wife because she really introduced me to a lot and, exposed me to a
Mm,
lot. I used to travel with her, just filming, doing her research. She was Judith Jamison and all these major performance
mm,
arts
mm,
folks. And that's why I got into covering
yes.
theater a lot, because of her.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. 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 Yeah. Well, I know that Reverend Thomas Anderson, we have to thank him for setting us up
Yes.
here today and using his professional talents to make us look as good as we can look.
And the quality pictures here, you don't get this on, he's right. You don't get this on Zoom.
That's right. That's right. So he's taking us up to the next level. So I know that we have to get ready for our next Tuesday. Well, our Tuesday session is coming up,
Mhm.
and I know we have someone that is leading that up here shortly. But
Great.
brother, again, just want to thank you for taking some time out of your schedule
Mhm.
to visit with us today and share some of your tremendous experiences that you've had in life.
Great.
So we praise God for you and the rest of our faith family until we meet again next time. And we'll just keep this moving forward.
Sounds good.
God bless
Thank
you,
you,
brother.
Reverend. All right.
Talk soon.
Bye now.